I am Brooke Stock, and I work for Johnson County Community College for International Education as a coordinator, and I will be moderating today's session. So on behalf of JCCC International Education Office, I want to welcome and thank you for logging into Explore the World Fall 2020 Global Speaker Series. Since we can't send you out into the world, we are bringing the world to you. So far, we have heard from New Zealand about the news that's been going on there recently and returned to memories of Africa. And today we look to the future as we open the topic of international careers. I think so many of us are interested in being a part of something that leaves a real impact in this world. And that is one of the features of the US Peace Corps that makes it such an outstanding organization to volunteer with. So today we are fortunate to be meeting with Jessica Vandivort de Montiel, who is the recruiter for the Peace Corps. And she will be talking to us about her experience as a volunteer and also about the process to get into the Peace Corps as a volunteer. And we'll also be hearing from Dr. John Harty, who will share about some of his experience from Uzbekistan when he served. Jessica Vandivort de Montiel is the US Peace Corps recruiter for Kansas, Nebraska, and Western Missouri. She's a graduate of Truman State University, and Jessica worked in employee benefit sales in Kansas City prior to serving in the Peace Corps. As a Peace Corps volunteer in Guatemala, Jessica partnered with local education and health ministries to develop rural youth development programs, empowering youth to lead healthy lives and to commit to positive roles in their communities. Following her volunteer service, she remained in Guatemala and continued to support volunteer and Guatemalan partners as the US Peace Corps youth programs and training specialist. A strong believer that every American should be given the opportunity to serve, Jessica returned to Kansas City as a program officer for the Corporation for National and Community Services, overseeing federal Senior Corps and AmeriCorps grant programs in Kansas and Missouri. Returning to Peace Corps in 2018 as a recruiter, she is thrilled to support the agency from her hometown. So, Jessica, we thank you so much for joining us today. And when you're ready to begin, we're ready to listen.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. All right, I am going to share my screen. I do see a note that says host disabled participant screen sharing. So I'm just going to wait a second for that to be unlocked. In the meantime, in the chat, I'm going to type in a question. And I know that Brooke mentioned that we're going to go ahead and keep ourselves on mute. So feel free to respond to this question in the chat. So let me type it first. What excites you about an international career? Whether you're established in the field of international development, education, higher education, or if you are thinking about launching your international career, I'd love to hear from you. Just take a second and type in the chat box, what excites you about international careers? And if I could get a thumbs up if you can see my screen. Thank you. All right. Thank you for those of you who were able to participate. So I'm seeing opportunities to meet people from around the world, learning about other cultures. I really like this response of making the world a more equitable place for everyone. So it sounds like we're all in very good company, and I'm excited to share the next 55 minutes with you all. So as Brooke mentioned, I am a returned Peace Corps volunteer. I served in Guatemala, I speak Spanish, and I served in the youth and development sector. I am one other thing, apologies, I need to correct on here. Okay, For those of you who are not familiar with the Peace Corps, I'd like to take a minute and talk about what is our mission. Our mission has not changed since 1961, which is to promote world peace and friendship. To do so, we have 3 goals to fulfill that. The first one is to help people and their interested countries meet the need within their community. Peace Corps only serves in the countries that request our support. The second and third goals are all about cross-cultural exchange. They're about Americans going abroad and sharing American culture based on our own lived experience. And then after service, we come back to our respective communities and share with our friends and family or anybody that will listen about our 27 months of service. Our Peace Corps program is a 27-month commitment that breaks down to 3 months of training and 2 years of working and living abroad in that same country. We also have a program called Peace Corps Response that have shorter terms, and those are for usually established professionals, many who have already worked abroad and speak the language of the country that they're serving in and have minimal training. If you have specific questions about that, please do follow up with me following the presentation today. So we have 2 minimum requirements for Peace Corps service. The first is that the applicants must have U.S. citizenship. So this can be by birthright or naturalization. The second minimum requirement is that you're at least 18 years old by the time you serve in Peace Corps. Notice that there is no upper limit to Peace Corps service. So for those of you who've always thought about Peace Corps being an opportunity and haven't had a chance to serve yet, do know that there is no upper age limit. So I'd love to chat with folks who may be interested in serving later in life. Do know that 95% of our volunteers have at least an undergraduate degree. The exceptions to that may be significant experience in certain sectors, such as agriculture or community economic development. Connect with me if you want to talk a little bit more about the experience you have and see if you may qualify for the positions that don't necessarily require an undergraduate degree. So, as many of you probably know, in March 2020, we evacuated all of our volunteers throughout the world due to COVID-19 and the safety and health implications of that. So here is a map of the countries that we served in. This map is not entirely up to date to the moment that we left the countries in March. However, it gives you an idea of the regions that we serve in. All right. When you apply to Peace Corps, you can express sector preferences. This way you can apply your education and practical experience in one of these 6 sectors. One thing to note is that volunteers will enter service operating in their primary work scope, but you're not limited in developing other projects. These are called secondary projects that are historically identified as a community need and may meet your interest or skills. So for example, when I was a youth development volunteer, I was assigned to support youth programming in specific schools and community organizations. However, at the community's request, I supported a new high school that was opening by teaching English during their first year while they were trying to hire a full-time English teacher in our very rural community. So again, in Guatemala, very few people actually attend high school, and one of those barriers is transportation and the ability to pay for schooling outside of their immediate community. So I definitely wanted to support my community with that initiative to start a high school where kids nearby didn't have to travel long distances. So I didn't have a degree in English or in education, but I was able to access resources from the internet, other volunteers, staff to get the project off the ground. Okay, so you might be asking, how does all this work? So Peace Corps is unique in that it is one of the very few funded programs of its nature. We cover the cost of your flight to and from country. We provide you with 3 months of comprehensive language, cultural, and technical training. You do receive a living stipend every month. This allows you to live at the level of the people that you're serving. It's going to pay for your rent, food, and transportation. Pretty much covers your basic needs. We also cover your medical and dental needs during service. This is different than insurance. We actually have the providers available for you for whatever your health and dental needs are during service. We also offer the opportunity to defer loans during service. So this means that during your 27 months overseas, you can stop making payments on loans. Of course, we'll give you information to give that to your loan. I lost the word. Your lending institution, and that depending on the type of loan that you have, you may or may not accrue interest. And so it is a great perk for people that have student loans and still would like to serve. You also get 48 days of vacation over the course of 2 years. So that means you get 2 days for every month that you serve, and it rolls over from a month to the next. So you can take a vacation, visit nearby countries, or even go back home if you would like. As a reminder, we do pay for your transportation to and from country when you leave and come back from service. However, if you choose to travel on your own time, it is on your own dime. So one of the things that I did plan for Peace Corps service was I held a little bit of money back to pay for a trip home about a year into my service. Okay. Really, really important things about benefits after Peace Corps service. Once you've completed 27 months, you'll receive just under $10,000 in your bank account. So this money is yours to spend it however you wish. Some volunteers use the cash to travel to different countries on their way home. Others use it to jumpstart their savings, put a down payment on a car. So it's yours to use at your leisure. You also have lifetime access to our Coverdell Fellows program. That's a graduate school benefit that offers at least 25 to 100% tuition coverage in over 120 universities and colleges throughout the United States. And this is something that doesn't expire. That is a lifelong benefit that you have. So if you decide not to go to grad school right after Peace Corps, it'll be there. All right, you also have federal hiring advantages that will allow you to apply to federal agency. We call this non-competitive eligibility for 1 year following your Peace Corps service. So this is really an expedited hiring process for certain positions in the federal government. Okay, as many of you know, you have options to apply to the different regions and sectors around the world. We are in the process right now of evaluating what countries are going to be ready to receive volunteers when it is safe to do so. We're going through a comprehensive review on a country by country basis. Because of that, our application now is much more general than it was before. For example, if I were to apply a year ago to the same position I had, I would have applied to youth and development in Guatemala, leaving May 22nd, 2021. Now, I would apply to a similar position in the youth and development sector, serving in Mexico or Central America, leaving mid-2021. So that is an availability that my application could be shuffled to whichever country will be open and able to receive volunteers. So we are constantly updating our website about more information if you're interested in keeping up to date with that. So the application process can sometimes take quite a while. Under pre-COVID circumstances, I would have specified deadlines for application, but due to the pandemic, we don't have those currently in place. The biggest thing that I encourage people to do is if they plan to go overseas within the next 12 months, is to submit an application as soon as you are eligible to. Okay, we know that Peace Corps is returning to the field. By applying when you are ready, it helps you kind of cut down some of that wait time between what we typically have and then what we're experiencing now due to COVID. Okay, So I'm sure a lot of you on the call have had similar experiences with your family and friends um, that are concerned about what it is to live or work overseas. So I always share this slide with folks in case they're thinking about how to help people understand why it is you want to serve overseas for 2 years. I think it's important for our family and friends to know that host countries invite the Peace Corps. We don't go anywhere where we have not been invited. We are providing a living stipend and transition fund. So you have some financial support while you are serving in the Peace Corps. We do have a 24/7 toll-free line for your family to use in case of an emergency. Obviously, we always encourage volunteers and families to communicate directly, but there are emergencies occasionally when family members will need to contact us first, or if they're not able to reach the volunteer. And the network of returned Peace Corps volunteers here in the United States is huge, over 240,000 alum here. And I have to say that that alum network has really helped me in my professional career as well, in each position that I've had following my Peace Corps service. So it's a great opportunity, and it's good for our family and friends to know that as we're contemplating a career launching overseas with Peace Corps. So I wanted to share with you a couple of pictures from my service to kind of tell you the story of what I did as a youth development volunteer in Guatemala. I started Peace Corps with a pretty intermediate level of Spanish. I was not fluent by any means. I had spent some time overseas between my junior and senior year of college. I studied years of Spanish, but it just never really clicked for me. So if you would have told me when I first arrived in Guatemala that I'd be facilitating workshops on how to prevent HIV, I would have laughed. But this picture on the upper left-hand corner is a good year into my service. I was then pretty fluent in Spanish, and this is a picture of me facilitating a workshop with other teachers to learn how to use participatory education in teaching of HIV prevention. On the upper right hand side is a picture of our career day. These are my tercer básico students, which means they're about 8th grade as far as how long they've been in school. Only 1% of the population from Guatemala actually attends and graduates university, and most of them will discontinue their education after 8th grade. So this is really the last opportunity for them to be in the formal education system. So we created a career day that they've continued to do every year since, where they prepare a resume. We do mock interviews where we invite other professionals from the community to come in and facilitate that career day. And I was really impressed that these students were able to access the clothes that were appropriate for interviews in preparing for the world of work. I told them, I said, nobody go out and buy anything. See if you can see if anyone can lend you an outfit for our interview day. And so I was really impressed by the resourcefulness. On the bottom left-hand corner is a cooking camp that I held during our summer breaks, which were actually November and December there. That's when kids are out of school, there's not a lot going on, and I saw that as an opportunity for our goal 2, which was our intercultural exchange. So about once a week, I had a group of young ladies come over. They learned how to cook from a recipe. We shared some really common recipes like how to make brownies, how to make different types of cakes. I had a little tiny toaster oven that I used to bake with. And so it was a really great chance to get to know the girls that I worked with on a personal basis, so that they felt comfortable talking to me, about their problems, and helping them seek the resources that they need. So this is my tiny little kitchen in Guatemala. And then on the right-hand side, the bottom right, is a picture of our Encuentro Juvenil. So this was held at a location that the government, the Guatemalan government education ministry lent to us for about a 3-day retreat. It's a leadership retreat that we had for young people. So in this picture, you can see a mix of Peace Corps volunteers, some of the youth that we work with, and some of their teachers or mentors. So this was a leadership camp. It's very common for Peace Corps volunteers to facilitate leadership camps, especially for youth development volunteers. This was especially poignant in Guatemala because many of these students come from very different ethnic groups and speak very, very different languages other than Spanish. And they have very few opportunities to travel and get to know other young people from their country. So it definitely had a diversity component to the retreat. So one of my favorite activities that I did as a Peace Corps volunteer. Okay, so I can't talk about Guatemala without talking about the beauty and the diversity ecosystems that exist in Guatemala. Growing up in Kansas City, I only saw mountains when I traveled to the Black Hills during summer vacation, or to Colorado and saw some mountains there. And so it was quite a surprise to me to live somewhere where for every single house that I lived in my 7 years of living in Guatemala, I could see a volcano from my home. So the upper left-hand corner is a group of us, volunteers and Guatemalans, who took a trip to hike the highest point of Central America. It's called Volcán Tajulmuco. It's really close to the Mexico-Guatemalan border. The community that I lived in was a little bit over an hour from the border with Mexico, near where the ocean is. So I am not a camper, I am not a hiker, but I took on that challenge, and I'm so thankful that I did. On the upper right-hand corner is a picture of the view as we're coming down from the volcano, of the volcano, trying to think of how to say it in English, La Cadena de Volcanes, the volcano chain, as you look south along the Pacific coast of Guatemala. And then at the bottom left-hand corner is a banana stand alongside the street. I had no idea there are so many different types of bananas. I think this is an example of incredible beauty next to, you know, what was probably a really dusty, dirty, loud road, you know, with buses trimming by. And so one of the things that I took away from my time in Guatemala and in my Peace Corps service was really to just take in the sights and the sounds and the smells of life around me. And then on the bottom right hand corner is a picture of my community as I'm walking down from one of my smaller villages. The village was kind of on the side of the mountain, and I'm walking down the mountain. And then to the right, you can see where there's houses, and that's where my home was. So this side of the mountain that I lived on was facing north. You can see from my house the volcano that I was on in the upper left-hand corner, the highest point in Central America. Very, very, very cold, considering it's Central America. It did snow a couple of times on the top of the volcano. I could see it from where I was. Didn't snow in my community though. But the really cool thing about this picture is on the right hand side, you can see some clouds, and those are clouds that are coming in from the Pacific coast. And so if you go to the south side of my mountain, it's the slope to the Pacific Ocean. And you can see in the picture in the middle, another community, another village within my municipality that I worked in. I traveled there about 2 or 3 times a week. I took that picture one day just to kind of put in perspective, you know, on the lower right hand side is the northern side of the mountain, and then in the middle is on the southern side of the mountain, just looking down towards the coast. And it's the vegetation is lush and it's warm, and it is a rainforest. And so it's very, very cool how many different ecosystems you can experience traveling such a short distance in Guatemala. This is a picture of my Peace Corps cohort. I enjoy this picture because we look a little bit more scruffy than we did when we left 2 years before. But we have a glow about us because we really took in and enjoyed the 2 years of Peace Corps service for what it was, living with and sharing life with other Guatemalans, and learning so much about the world, the little world that we served in while we were Peace Corps volunteers. So Guatemala is actually only the size of about Tennessee, and it's crazy to think how many adventures, how many experiences, how many heartbreaks you can experience in such a small area. But we were definitely thankful to have had that opportunity. So I am going to stop sharing, and we have I know Dr. Harty is going to share. Would you like to go into sharing right now, and then maybe we can take questions at the end?
Sure, that sounds good.
Awesome.
All right, so I am going to pull up presentation here. All right, is that visible to everyone, what we're talking about? Okay, so this is my experience. I was in Uzbekistan for my experience. Now, I was evacuated, and so whereas Jessica was sharing that she was there and that normal Peace Corps service is 27 months, I was there a little less than a year because of the attacks of 9/11 and being just north of Afghanistan. But I'll talk a little bit more about that here in a second. The picture you're looking at here is from the second largest city in Uzbekistan, and it was once the capital of a very large empire, and it was the capital of Timur. Some of you may know of him by the name Tamerlane, who Europeans were very nervous about. He was on the doorsteps of Europe. The Greeks especially were nervous that he was going to invade their territory, and he ended up passing away just before they got to Europe, but Europe knew he was coming. Anyway, this was his capital. Well, in case you're not familiar with where Uzbekistan is, let's start off there. I've highlighted both the United States as well as Uzbekistan. Now, Jessica referenced having taken vacations to the Black Hills, which happens to be where I'm from. I grew up in the mountain time zone, and Uzbekistan is literally 12 hours away. And so it was interesting in the very few phone calls I was able to make to family that all I had to do was subtract 12 hours or add 12 hours, and there you go. That's the time it is back in the States. Closer view of Uzbekistan, I've highlighted the 3 cities that I spent the vast majority of my time in. Peace Corps has had the slogan, the toughest job you'll ever love, and that is so very true. Many of the highest highs I've had in life, as well as many of the lowest lows, were all squashed into that service in Uzbekistan. I can remember literally after visiting an orphanage in Uzbekistan, like going home and crying myself to sleep that night because of how the orphans were treated. I can also remember just like not being able to sleep just because the day had been so good, and I just was bursting with energy. It's just high highs and low lows while you're over there. I went over there as a TEFL instructor, that is teaching English as a foreign language. I am not an English professor. I saw that Dr. Gully was tuned in here, but I had both a bachelor's as well as a master's in geography, and that was enough to be a TEFL instructor, teaching basically conversational English within Uzbekistan. My language, that is Uzbek language training and cultural training, took place just outside the capital of Tashkent, and then was placed in Samarkand originally. And then because one of our Peace Corps volunteers ended up returning home, they had me switch schools to Bukhara. And this was an interesting experience. The school I went to was a very, very high profile school within Uzbekistan. Hillary Clinton had visited this particular school during the Clinton administration, and everyone at that school expected me to have Laura Bush come visit our school at some point during my service, which I was like, I'll try, we'll see. But like I said, my time was cut short. So Uzbekistan does border Afghanistan, and shortly after the attacks of 9/11, we were evacuated. Now, we didn't exactly know where we were going, but Peace Corps does treat the safety of Peace Corps volunteers very, very seriously. We ended up staying there until early October, and then we were on lockdown. We weren't allowed to leave our particular city of service. And then we all gathered in the capital, Tashkent, and that's when they told us we were coming back to the States. It was an interesting experience. Everyone's got a story. For those who are old enough anyway, everyone's got a story for where they were at that time, myself included. I just wrapped up dinner and was speaking with my host mother when my host brother started yelling to me from the opposite room in a mixture of Russian, Tajik, and a little bit of English. And I didn't understand what he was saying, but I knew something was up, and so I rushed into the other room, and sure enough, I saw what took place. Well, this is where I lived, which might not look like much. This is Soviet architecture, which is kind of a blemish on the landscape, and even locals will say it's kind of a blemish. Newer buildings look much nicer. Older buildings look much nicer than the Soviet era. My building, my particular building, my apartment was the second building. That is the building on the right-hand portion of your screen. I actually lived with two separate families in that building. I originally lived with a family on the 4th floor, but the husband and wife divorced, and because the husband was in another country working, in that culture, it wasn't possible, I should say, for me to stay with the wife the woman, the now single woman. And so I moved in with a Russian-speaking family on the 1st floor. I don't speak Russian. I wasn't trained in Russian. They didn't speak Uzbek, which was what I was trained in. The reason why I moved in with that family, in part, was because the mother, wife, mother, she worked in my school as an English teacher. And so we did have a means of communicating. And when I moved in, it was with the understanding that they would give me a little bit of a break in rent. I'd still pay rent, but a lower rent amount if I promised to only speak English in the home, because the father wanted to learn English. And I'm like, well, I want to learn some Russian too. And so we came to an agreement. The first 6 months were to be nothing but English. And then after that, we would switch over to Russian. Well, I ended up, unfortunately, being evacuated about a week before we were scheduled to switch over to Russian. So I do not speak Russian, although I hear it, and I feel like I should, like, there's a bit of an understanding when I hear it, even if I can't speak it. Anyway, this is where I lived. The market was just beyond the far building in this photo, and beyond the market was the school that I taught at. And it was kindergartens were all by themselves, a separate school building typically within Uzbekistan, but then grades 1 through 12 were in a combined building. So there was everything from 1st grade all the way through 12th grade in the building that I taught in. I primarily worked with the older students at that school. I did work with some college students separately, but that's another story for another time. Anyway, one of the things I like to talk about when I talk about my Peace Corps experience is when you go into Peace Corps, oftentimes you have a title. I happen to be a language instructor. Other people are community development people, or maybe something in healthcare, agriculture. There are all these different titles, but you get there and you quickly realize people will use a resource for what they have a need for. And so I ended up doing a project down one of these streets, and for the life of me, I can't remember what street I would go down to get to a particular building where we were working on creating an online classroom for children with disabilities. And we were getting computers donated from the United States, and that's where I came in to help get computers over there. And they were able to establish, it was a building with a large 1st floor room where students that might be in wheelchairs could wheel in, whereas they couldn't get into the school's that they would normally attend. And so it gave them community as well as an opportunity to interact with their students virtually. And so this was cutting edge at the time. I also ended up, we were setting up a sister city program just before I got evacuated. And so there were all these various projects. Those are two of the bigger ones that I worked on in addition to being a TEFL instructor. It was really eye-opening for me in terms of what you do. It's such a cultural experience to be involved with something like this. This is my original host family from my training. My three host brothers, our pet dog, the host father and mother, as well as the host grandmother, who spent as much time with us as anyone else in the family. We were really closely knit, really enjoyed this family. They were top-notch all around. I was really, really thankful for this particular family. The host brothers, this is me with the three of them, and this is literally my bedroom. I remember walking in the first night and laughing because they had Minnie and Mickey Mouse as well as Pluto on the wall of my bedroom. It was just how they had decorated it. And I couldn't believe that was the bedroom I was going to be sleeping in. Donnie Uka is the word for younger brother. Donnie Uka is the son on the far right there. He was a teenager. He was a little too cool to do anything. But the two other brothers, Bakram Uka and Ulugbek Uka, they were just a joy to spend time with. I honestly couldn't wait to get home from language training to play soccer out in the streets with the kids. As I oftentimes tell my students, it's an age-dominated society, or a society that really emphasizes elders, the importance of elders. And so if you're the elder and you speak out, no one questions you. They just assume you're speaking truth, and they're going to take your word for anything. Well, I quickly learned you don't lose many soccer matches if you're the eldest male. And so like I use that to my benefit. Ulebek, Bakram rather, the youngest, would call me out on it, but he was the only one that had guts to call me out. We had fun. We goofed around quite a bit. This is our dog. Someone had told them just before I moved in that Spike was a good American name for a dog. And so that's Spike, who liked to chase the soccer ball around. We had fun with that. Anyway, those are some of the quick experiences with that. I have a wealth of stories, and I'm sure Jessica does too. It's really tough to come back and summarize this experience in just a nutshell. There are things that you definitely struggle with from a cultural standpoint. Notably for me within Central Asia, you can't talk about Central Asia and not talk about women's rights, or the lack of women's rights within Uzbekistan and Central Asia as a whole. I struggled with that. I saw women being mistreated on a regular basis. The treatment of orphan kids was gut-wrenching. And yet the treatment of elders within a family is something that, like, you know, I tried to emulate when I came back to the United States. And, you know, it just was such a rich experience. In all my travels, and I've been quite blessed with travels around the world, nothing even comes close to this, because you truly do live as a local. You're always a little bit of an outsider, but, you know, families welcome you in, and you end up like eating as they eat. You live life as they do. You just experience the richness of a culture other than your own. It's a truly remarkable time, and can't recommend it enough. All right. Well, Jessica, let's turn it back to you. Or Brooke, maybe.
Dr. Harty, thank you very much. I am always so excited when another RPCV joins us for these events, because I talk about Peace Corps every single day, and sometimes that rich, deep experience doesn't always come across the way it does for a returned Peace Corps volunteer whose career has led them in a direction other than recruiting people for Peace Corps. Dr. Harty, I'd love to hear a little bit about what were your immediate steps following Peace Corps service?
I was evacuated, and this is something that differs from many other Peace Corps volunteers. Oftentimes, I remember meeting some Peace Corps volunteers that were approaching the end of their service, and they were, making sure that they'd spend some quality time with some of their closest friends and family over there, maybe get some gifts for family members back in the US, think about what was to come. Mine was, condensed into a really short time period. And even though I ended up having 2-3 weeks after the attacks of 9/11, I didn't know when I was coming back. I didn't know, how that would play out. I just couldn't plan. And so I ended up coming back in October of 2001. And to be honest, I lived a couple of months at home with mom and dad. I think mom was pretty happy to see me. She and my aunt, that is my mom's sister, had planned to come visit me that September. They were planning to arrive in Uzbekistan, I think September 15th or so. And their trip got canceled, obviously, because of the attacks. But we were really hoping that they could share my experience a little bit, that I'd be able to introduce them to my new family, that my new family could meet my family, my American family, if you will. And, so my mom was really interested to hear more about, some of my experiences. I ended up teaching at a community college just very briefly before going on for my PhD at K-State. And that's what I ended up doing. One of the things I do remember about coming back was the requests to talk about that experience, about being in Uzbekistan, whether it be a newspaper interview or speaking in schools. I was doing that on a regular basis.
Do you think that was because it was a part of the world that a lot of people had not heard much about, and all of a sudden it was part of kind of our daily conversations?
I do. And the fact that I could relate to the cultures of Afghanistan, both Uzbek as well as Tajik. I was in a Tajik speaking city, and Tajik's more closely related to English and French and Spanish than it is to Uzbek. And so my Uzbek training didn't do a lot of good once I got to my site. But sometimes that happens. And but both of those languages are spoken in Afghanistan. There was an understanding of the culture. One of the last interactions I had with students at my school was an advanced English club meeting. And I remember asking my students, because there were whispers of the US going into Afghanistan, how many of my students thought the US should go into Afghanistan and take on the Taliban? And the students that rose their hand were all the Russian speaking students. And I remember asking them why, and it was because we had been attacked by, there was some kind of understanding, some group related to the government there in Afghanistan. And then I asked the other students, why do you think we should not attack Afghanistan or go into Afghanistan? And the overriding concern was that the warfare would spill into their country. They were concerned about war coming to Uzbekistan.
Dr. Harty, thank you for sharing that experience with us and that perspective. I have one last question for you. When you were contemplating applying for the Peace Corps, going overseas for what you hoped to be 2 years and only ended up being 1, what was the final push for you to say, yeah, this is what I want to do?
I don't know. It was something I can remember seeing Peace Corps commercials when I was a little kid, and for some reason I was like, I want to go do that. I'm going to do that, and it was just the next logical step. For whatever reason, that's what I wanted to do. And I can actually remember some of the other Peace Corps volunteers asking me how I could be so certain this is, what they want to do. Is something I haven't thought about in a while. I'm assuming just before you left for Guatemala, you had a staging event in the US?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We did as well. My roommate, after talking with me, ended up not going. And I always kind of felt bad about that. I'm like, I just felt like this was the thing to do, and he wasn't so sure. If I may, I see that Jeanette has a question here, if I can field this. She writes, you mentioned the treatment of women. How do Peace Corps volunteers respond when facing cultural traditions or perspectives with which they personally perhaps strongly disagree? That is $1 million question, Jeanette. I don't know if there is a correct answer. There were times I intervened. I can't think of any times I regret not intervening, but there were definitely times I intervened. For example, I remember being at a bus stop one time, and these little boys, maybe 9, 10 years old, were throwing little rocks, like marble-sized rocks, but good-sized marbles, at a little girl, aiming at her legs. And it had to have hurt, and no one was intervening, and she was yelling at the boys to stop because it hurt. And all it did for me to stop it, to put a stop to it, was I stepped in between. I made my presence known as the elder male. I stepped in between the boys and that girl. And initially they tried to get around me with those rocks. They wanted to reach around me and throw the rocks, continue doing that. And I would just take a side step one way or the other, and it put an end to it pretty quickly, because they understood if they hit me, even if it was accidentally, it would have been in my right in that culture to quite literally beat them and then take them home by their ear. And then their parents probably would beat them too for hitting an elder male. So sometimes it was easier than others. When it came to adult women who were being beaten, it was tough. It really was tough. Jessica, how about you? Tough times?
So I think one of the, like many countries in Latin America, the concept of machismo is very real. And being a woman that is a foreigner living there, it definitely was a recipient of that. And so it was different though, obviously, because I didn't have the relationships with people there that a lot of the women that suffer domestic abuse, etc., would have. There's the catcalling, things like that you decide how you're going to respond to it before it comes up, right? Catcalling seems pretty minimal, but it can quickly escalate. And so thinking about how to respond to those situations ahead of time is part of your 3 months of training, of your intercultural training. When we have language and cultural training, we are with Guatemalans, right? Guatemalan cultural facilitators. And so we have time to talk about, what does that mean? Certain SOGI identities, right? Reflecting about how to be an ally in a country that doesn't allow people necessarily live openly or out of the closet, and then how to be an ally to your fellow Peace Corps volunteers that also identify as LGBTQ. And so we spend a lot of time in those first couple of months thinking about those situations and preparing for them. As a woman who experienced some of the mistreatment of women, but mostly through catcalls and degrading language, there were times when I had a platform to be able to speak up against it, and there were other times for my safety and well-being I just had to keep going. and worry about my own safety at the time. So from an institutional point of view, we have our GLOW camps, Girls Leading Our World, right? Teaching girls and boys how to empower young girls and women to have ownership of their own bodies and to promote better gender equality. So wonderful question. It is so complicated. And there are some people that decide that they are not able to find a way through that and decide to return home during their service. And so it's not ideal. It's not what we would hope for. But I think it's an important thing to know that there is a lot of reflection going on in those 2 years of service. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessica and John. We have another question too. You guys want to answer this as well. Do you feel like you furthered the progress of peace through your Peace Corps service? And if so, how? And if not, why?
I can take this one first. Dr. Harty, if you'd like to respond in a second. When I look at the concept of peace, it is building friendship. The whole friendship thing is a big deal to me, to promote a better understanding so that they understand who I and my experience is as an American, as a US American, excuse me, and how and who they are as individuals, as Guatemalans. And so there was a first step of mutual understanding that neither one of us had had before then. And peace is also providing opportunities that weren't there before. I'll be really, really quick about this. One of my favorite stories is a young woman that I taught in middle school life skills courses. And she was really, really shy, but really excited about the work that we were doing. Long story short, about a year ago, I was on the Facebook page of the what is now an office that was created in my community called Oficina de la Juventud y Niñez. So it's the Office of Children and Youth. And she's now the director of that office that didn't exist when I started Peace Corps 12 years ago. But because of the efforts that I made and the other Peace Corps volunteers that came behind me made with our counterparts, with the in-country partners that we worked with, they decided that work with youth and helping keep them safe and healthy and preparing for the world after schooling, etc., was important. They created an office, and this girl that I worked with, her name's Lady, now gets paid to do that. And so as far as promoting peace, I feel like I have promoted a little piece of peace in mutual understanding and in providing an opportunity for somebody and other young people in my community.
For me, I'll go back to those Peace Corps goals. I like to think that people like Jessica and myself did a lot in simply just living in another country for a while, to give other countries a face to America that, we're not necessarily the worst that they see on TV. I remember a lot of my friends over there would simply not believe me that I had not seen a high speed car chase, with gunfire in the streets of, every US city. And I was like, I haven't seen one of those. I don't know anyone who has seen one of those. And yet, because they see it in the movies, that's what they know of America. And so seeing someone like me or Jessica, I think does a lot in terms of giving an everyday face to America and what Americans are like. At the same time, I like to think that returned Peace Corps volunteers like ourselves, when we come back, we share stories of what life was like. We share stories of what the families were like that we stayed with, that we laughed with, that we ate with. And there are a lot of similarities. I can't speak enough for the treatment of elders, just how they bring them into the family, and they don't send them away, they don't shoo them away, but instead bring them in. They're every bit of family. It's multi-generational. There's a true love of the family there, and it really is beautiful. That, and their bread is phenomenal. So I gotta speak up for that, which I absolutely loved. And if nothing else, it gives me a voice to, I'll say, help promote things like the Greater Kansas City Peace Building Conference, which is ongoing through November. All right, I see Tom like that. So that's my little plug for the Peace Building Conference. Tune in for that. Check that out, people.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much. And then Jessica, a question directly to you. What gave you the final push to decide to become a Peace Corps volunteer yourself?
Yeah, so I attended about 6 Peace Corps events when I was at Truman, and then when I was in Kansas City, I went to all over the city, kind of stalking the recruiter, because I wasn't quite sure if it was right for me. The like living overseas for 2 years was hard because I am a homebody. I love my family. I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do that. And I worked in insurance. My degree is in anthropology and sociology. I spent time overseas actually doing archaeology, and then working in Ohio as an archaeologist for a while. And then I was like, oh, this is for the birds, and I don't want to get my PhD in anthropology. So I was like, well, I'll work in the private sector for a while. And the private sector was wonderful because it gave me opportunities to do things that I didn't have time to do if I had been working in another sector. This company allowed me to do volunteer work during my breaks. About every week, I had about an hour worth of volunteer work that I could do at other places. And getting involved with community organizations in Kansas City and looking back at my experience as a sociology anthropology major, I said, if I don't do this now, I will not do it until I retire, which is totally an option. But I knew I wanted a family, and I knew I wanted to buy a house and all that stuff, but I wanted to not let the opportunity of Peace Corps pass me by. I went to Conception Abbey. I don't know if, raise your hand if you know where Conception Abbey is. It's a Benedictine monastery in Conception, Missouri. I went there for about 3 days and had like a silent retreat where I wrote my Peace Corps application, because I knew if I didn't go somewhere and I was completely alone, I was never going to do it. So that was the final push for me. I typed in my email address into the chat box. There's also a link above if you want to click on it. If you want to follow up with me about applying to Peace Corps, more information about Peace Corps, chatting with one of your groups, I'm totally available for that. Yeah. And Dr. Harty, before time runs out, I want to thank you for your service. Peace Corps service is an important part of being a service-minded American, and I want to thank you for that, first and foremost. Last and least most. No.
Right back at you. Thanks, Jessica.
Well, and we want to thank both of you for agreeing to participate, to be here, to share your experiences, and to help inform us more about what the Peace Corps is, what that looks like, and if we're interested, then what those steps are to become a volunteer ourselves. So thank you both so much. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending today. We are so glad that you came to learn something new and take a little break from everything else that's going on right now. And as a reminder, Explore the World is still happening. So next week on Wednesday, we are doing Headlines from Netherlands. And this will be an awesome opportunity to connect with our JCCC Dutch friends that we've been making through the Dutch Exchange, which is an awesome program through our college. So we'll have a panel of folks from it's Koning Willem College that will be talking about what's going on in the Netherlands right now. So please join us for that. Otherwise, yes, we hope you have a fantastic day, and we'll see you all soon. Thank you.